Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast from the Stoughton Delicatessen. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD, along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette, and our special guest today, Lesley Chesterman.
Thank you, Aaron and Bill,
Sitting
for having
in the guest
me.
seat today.
Yeah. I'm very excited.
And you get the Danish.
I get the Danish when I leave.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The
First you
bonus
have
for
to-
every guest. Now, you're here today in the guest seat because we're about to talk about the new list, Canada's 100 Best Restaurants, which just came out this week.
Yes.
And the fact that, well, first of all, Montreal has number one. We'll talk about that in a sec.
Yes.
And the fact that we have, 28 out of 100
28 out of, but more importantly, Aaron.
Just forget my name, Bill? Or-
More importantly, Toronto only has 24. I know that your friend Brian is going to be very, very distraught about this, but Ontario, though, has more than Quebec,
Okay.
by 3.
Yeah,
Well, let's
also-
talk
yeah.
about that at one
Yeah.
point. So let's start with the number one restaurant in Canada on this
Right.
list, which is Mont Lapin.
Yes.
Right. They were number
Second
one
year in a row.
last year.
Yes.
Congratulations to them.
And also on McLean's list last year of the best
They were.
of the top 20 in the country.
Right, which should come out. Is that going to
Shortly.
come out? Is it going to? Are they doing it this year?
I don't know.
We don't know. Yeah. Well, Mont Lapin is run by real professionals who really captured the spirit of creativity meets professionalism meets amazing experience meets doing things right, and obviously things are going well for them. I think the list is very interesting because we're seeing a lot of dominance of Quebec and yet not enough from Quebec City. We're seeing the kind of death of the Newfoundland food scene, which has become, there are many things about this list that are very interesting Canada-wide. I think the big story in this province is that we're not seeing enough from Quebec, and that has to do a lot of the way that these lists are put together, is that they get a huge amount of judges.
150.
I mean, that's a huge number of people, and a lot of them eat at the same places, to be honest. A lot of people go to the places with the most buzz. And, you can even say that the restaurants that are in the top 10, people have gone to them because they were in the, top 25 last year,
Well, this
so
always is the case.
It's always the case.
But,
so.
it's very interesting in terms of Mont Lapin. These are guys, Vanya and Marco, the owners, chefs, and Alex Landry, one of the sommeliers. They've been together for 15 years. They were working.
They're a couple.
They're a couple.
Yeah.
Marco and Vanya are a couple, and they started off with M. Papillon and Joe Beef and all the rest. So I mean, it's not as if they're just fly by night. They really worked. But the other interesting aspect to my mind is, it's the focus now seems more on casual kind of restaurants. You go to Mont Lapin, I mean, Aaron, you could be wearing your baseball hat, you could be wearing your baseball pants, and it's very, very late. And you could be playing baseball. It's very, very, very laid back, and the prices aren't outrageous. I mean, it's kind of almost tapas. No,
Are the prices outrageous or not?
no, I was just there, and they're not outrageous.
But across the board, if you factor out Mont Lapin, it seems to me a lot of those places seem like they're very expensive.
A very interesting example is not Mont Lapin. For me, a more interesting example is Adulis, the number 2 restaurant in Toronto, which
Right.
is considered one of the really fantastic restaurant. And the last time I went to Toronto, I wanted to eat there, and I found a menu from a year and a half ago that was kind of $125 for the tasting menu. And I said, oh, okay, let's go. I'll invite a friend. I'll empty the bank account. And then at the last minute, I only got up on their waiting list. I couldn't even get a table. But then I found out that you had to put a deposit, and it was closer to the $200 mark. Now that also has an effect with the Michelin Guide. They got a Michelin star, and ever since they got a Michelin star, getting a Michelin star will give people a chance to put their prices up. But we maybe at the end of the podcast we can talk about Michelin and Montreal.
So I want to just, to what you said, and I've always found this interesting, I was looking at the pictures that are on the list, the plates that they show. And some of them, they look like there's 3 pieces of nothing on the plate, and that's your meal, and it's probably $100. Is that a trend? Is that part of the buzz to get on this list, do you think?
Well, we are definitely not seeing the old days now, when I'm talking the 90s, where you'd really go to a restaurant and you get very big portions for $36 a main course, and that was at a fancy restaurant. So now we're getting a lot of little plates. I mean, they call them sharing plates, but God forbid you have to share one of those little plates with somebody, especially if somebody is taking more than their share. Somebody said to me the other day that new cuisine is just raw fish and avocado with some lemon juice and olive oil and some salt and a flour in the middle, And they're not entirely wrong. I mean, I think the thing that's changed about eating out is that we used to go out for dinner or whatever to have a meal and we were hungry, and now we want dinner to be an experience. An event. So I actually walk into some of these restaurants and I'm not hungry. It's not really about eating, it's about seeing a chef's style, saying that you went somewhere, going to one of the top restaurants.
Yeah.
So that whole, it's not Murray's. Remember Murray's? I mean, I used to go to Murray's to eat dinner,
To
right?
get a
Or
good
to
meal,
have,
yeah.
to have
Salisbury
lunch.
steak.
Salisbury steak. And
Yeah.
now, forget it. I mean, if you want to eat, you eat at home. If you want, it's almost like going to the theater. And theater tickets are high, and of course, restaurants have a million reasons to be high. Staff costs, ingredients are crazy. I mean, any of us who are shopping know how much just beef costs, or chicken costs, or butter costs. So they are more expensive. And now, I mean, and some restaurants are suffering, and some restaurants are so full that you can't get a table
Yeah,
and you're on a
no,
waiting
no,
list.
no.
So it's hard to even say how much it's affecting restaurants, that they're expensive.
It's interesting because the other Montreal restaurant placed 8th again is Biba, the fabulous little gem.
By the way,
in
is it
Verdun.
Biba or Beba?
Biba.
Biba?
I've heard both. Biba, okay.
But the owner tells me Biba,
It's
so
Biba.
I
Okay,
would have
okay,
to
know.
yeah.
I would get a lot. But again, like 25 people it sits. I mean, another guy who started off at
Joe
Beef,
yeah.
Liverpool, he was the
House,
chef
yeah.
there. These guys have years and years of experience, and they bring a certain creativity, and there is a casualness again to that kind of place. It's just different. It's not this imposing white tablecloth. And you've talked about this in the past, and Jacob Richler, who puts together the list, saying like people shouldn't really be running back to white tablecloth restaurants in these days, like economic times after the pandemic, and I think the focus has really changed in that regard.
Well, for this list it has, because if you look at the list, there's no Milos, there's no Le Club Chasse Pêche, which is one of our fanciest restaurants. There's no New Moishes. There's no Maison Boulud.
Yep.
And excuse me, but so Jacob Richland could be saying that, but all the restaurants I just named are probably sold out every night.
Right.
So there is a foodiness to this list that if you get a restaurant like Milos or Moishes, although they're hugely, I mean, one could argue that Milos is the most successful restaurant group in the world.
True.
I mean, and yet it doesn't make the Canadian list where it was started in Montreal, but that's because, it's kind of seen as simple, perfect Greek food, but there's none of that creativity and innovation that these lists demand.
When did that happen? When did that change from, great simple food as you described
The 90s, yeah.
to like fashionable?
The 90s, when all this nouvelle cuisine and tasting menus started, that's when things really started to change. But I think we're coming back to much more simple food. Now, I certainly am. I mean, we're seeing fancy food, but it's not at all as fancy as it was 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago, you get a dessert that was this high with twills and herbs and all this crap, and then you had to find your food in there. But we're not seeing that anymore, but we're kind of seeing that minimalist, what I said before, the raw fish and the avocado, and it's all very
Flowers,
healthy.
don't forget the flowers.
You must, to be on this list, you must have flowers in your food.
The way it was explained to me, there are half a dozen great Greek restaurants in the city. So I was asking someone who's a judge, and they said, well, it's because it's all the same. Like you go to these 6 different great Greek restaurants in town, and it's pretty much the same ingredients, the same method of cooking, and all the rest. And they explained it's like pizza places, some great pizza places in the city, and yet the same thing. It's just they follow a certain norm, and that's it. And they said, well, look at great burgers too, and all the rest. They're never on these lists.
Well, it's interesting you're mentioning pizza and all that, because one thing I found on the list is that 2 of our best Italian restaurants in Montreal, which are Impasto and Graziella.
Right.
Graziella, an amazing restaurant, arguably, but not on the list. So, we're seeing much more chef-driven food with many influences on the plate instead of, again, that's a very luxurious restaurant, Graziella, and not there. So we're also seeing, I think one thing that bothers me about some of these lists is we're seeing a lot of kind of in places that the judges, everybody's telling each other where to eat, which we said before, but you're kind of saying, oh, these people work with these people and they work with these people. And, that's why I don't like having tons of judges. I think it would be almost smarter to have kind of 5 judges who didn't necessarily agree. But I think a lot of people are just feeding off each other's opinions for these lists, and
Oh,
there
for
are a
sure.
lot of people who are left out who should be there.
Yeah, but you mentioned, I think in the list, if you look down, I think I said this to you when we spoke, L'Express, which is always
Yes.
one of the great favorite restaurants here,
Yeah.
way down on the list this year.
I'm
Yes.
amazed that it even got on
But-
because
but
But there was
Le
Mac did.
Le Mac not on
Mac,
the list.
same
Not
idea.
on the list last year
No.
either. Yeah, yeah.
These are
And-
restaurants that are full all the time.
yes,
all
but
the time.
I-
And they're
a lot
just as good. The two of them are
good.
just as
They're
good.
very similar, actually.
But you
Just
see, it goes back to saying L'Express is very in with all the foodie people. New York Times wrote a big article about it. I
Right.
love L'Express, so I'm not knocking it in any way
and the
whatsoever.
Mac is great too.
And Le Mac is great too, but L'Express is kind of the legendary
Yeah.
L'Express, older. If any tourists come to Montreal, that's where they're going to go. And if people, the judges, if they come from outside of Montreal to come eat in Montreal, a lot of them, people say, well, go to L'Express and then go to X other restaurant.
Right.
That's the kind of place that all the foodies say you have to start at L'Express.
So, like, I look at that and I think that's about evolution versus revolution, right? Their menu doesn't really evolve. Their dishes have always been successful,
Right.
are still there.
Right.
And if you don't have that revolution, again, back to flowers and everything on a plate and change it, it's like the judges in this case just ignore you. You haven't done anything different enough
Right.
to merit being on the list.
But you're an in place.
Yeah.
You're a
Yeah.
cool place. So there are a lot of cool places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So start a restaurant called Darwin. See how that does.
Yeah.
Talking about.
We started a restaurant called
You should.
Le Restaurant Branché. You
Yeah.
know, the Restaurant Branché.
Well, I love the fact Salle Climatisée.
Salle
I mean,
Climatisée, yeah.
One of the
Cool
great
little
names.
restaurant.
Have
yeah,
you been?
Cool. I've not been to Salle Climatisée. It's very small. I tried to go a couple of times. I don't call people for reservations. I couldn't get a reservation at the time, but there are other places like there are some gems on there, and that's why I like lists. Is that there's a restaurant called Bar Saint Denis, amazing
yeah.
restaurant, very very good. Mochione is on there, very good restaurant. So as much as there are people who are left out, there are people who are on that list who should be on that list. There's a great restaurant in Quebec City called Alvi. I think it should be, in the top 10. It's almost at the bottom. A great restaurant like Park, which is, beautiful sushi. Asian restaurants there are not enough of them. Junie not on the list, another great, they're just as good, those two restaurants. And not
No
on the
Indian
list.
restaurants. You don't see. You're right. There's
Oh,
a,
is Visions? The
Oh, yeah,
famous
yeah,
Visions-
right.
I don't think it's there.
No.
I didn't see it. I mean, the
No.
most famous
Which one?
Indian restaurant,
Indian.
Visions in Vancouver. I don't think it's even on the list. So it's just,
I'm kind of upset that, Golden Curry, which has been around for 100 years on St. Lawrence near Fairmount.
And what about
which
delis?
seems, I think,
What about delis?
not foodie enough. Yeah,
Oh, I get
Snowden
it.
Deli not there. Schwartz's not there.
Yeah, no.
Not
we-
there.
you-
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowden Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the hub of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowden Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowden Delicatessen. When I look at this list, I don't know if it's the same for you. I'm looking at names, and I didn't even know this place was existing, and it's in the top 100. So the one called Paloma. What is Paloma?
Oh,
Leslie
no.
will tell you.
Okay, Paloma is a restaurant it used to be a dumpling restaurant called Trilogy, and then it was taken over by a man and his daughter. She's a sommelier. His name, I know he and his brother are both in the restaurant industry. I don't want to get his name wrong, but it's kind of a very small restaurant, very good food. It's no way better than Le Club Chasse et Pêche. No offense to Paloma, they would agree, I'm sure. But it's a very foodie little restaurant,
Okay.
right near. It's right near the Crémazie. Crémazie and Saint Laurent, I think,
Yeah.
around there.
Okay. What's another one? I mean, Monarch has been around for
Monarch,
a while. Monarch's
yeah.
a big room.
Right. Right.
On the list, top
Yeah.
20, 30, I think. for
11th, I think.
Really?
Is it?
Well, it should
Or
be. Monarch
14,
is
yeah.
Monarch is a serious restaurant with very good food, and they have a very foodie part in the back with much more extravagant menu and more of a brasserie in the front, and the service is amazing, and the wine list is amazing. It's a great restaurant. It's there to stay.
So I would ask for people listening to this or watching the podcast today and thinking, this is great, but I'm sure I can't afford to eat at half the places that are on this list. If you had to pick a place or two from that list that you think are moderately priced.
Right. Well, Bar
what
Saint
would they
Denis,
be?
the one I mentioned, Bar
Okay.
Saint Denis is very good. Mochione
L'Express.
is very good.
L'Express.
If you haven't been to L'Express, get out from underneath your rock and go.
And by the way, Mon Lapin, I mean, you can get by if you don't order crazy bottles of wine, which they have the best wine list around, but it's tapas style. You get a lot of little bits. And
It might be hard to get a table, though. That's the thing,
Well,
is that when these places get on these lists, it's
But
hard to get-
nonetheless, I mean, they have starter plates and all the rest that aren't outrageous. There's certainly far more expensive spots in the city.
Yeah, Morsches would be more expensive than Bon Lapin. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Way
Yeah.
more. Yeah.
I think it's interesting too on the list is that you're seeing things like Tokay and Joe Beef that were former number ones.
Way down.
That Joe Beef is number 41, or
Yeah.
you're seeing Liverpool, but I don't know if Liverpool was always on the list, but you're seeing Tokay really far down the list, which, you know, these restaurants haven't gotten any worse that they should go down on the list. It's just that we're making room for the hotter, more talked about restaurants, you know. So they've had their moment in the sun, so they're moving down the list, but they're still there. I mean, again, I wonder with all these judges how recently they ate at these restaurants. I mean, are they casting votes based on a meal they had 3 years ago? I'm sure that there are rules. Like,
No, it's all within the year.
This is based on the world's 50 best.
Right.
And so there were I was a judge for that for a long time, and I never really paid attention to a lot of things. And I'll tell you, they don't check up. Nobody's asking for receipts. Nobody's asking if these meals were comped. Nobody's asking if people really are following the rules about when they last ate there. And so that's another problem with lists too. But in the end, I'm for this list because I think it's good that we're getting publicity, that Montreal is getting recognized. We have fewer restaurants in the top 25 than Toronto. We have 6, they have 8. And, you know, it's nice to see that Toronto is getting better and it's normal because Toronto for a long time was not very good. And
Well, to Bill's point, we started by talking about Toronto. Bill had brought it up. What changed in Toronto? When did that happen?
I think Toronto, I think enough Montrealers moved to Toronto. But, you know, Toronto chefs came years ago for the Montreal Highlights Festival, and they were very honest about the influence of Montreal and Quebec that it had on them. And a lot of Toronto chefs were coming to Montreal to see what was going on here. And they were Montreal was a city that, you know, where trends started, and, you know, Toronto was the place that, you know, the trends probably died. But now a lot of Montreal chefs are going to Toronto to see what's going on. You know, it's a bigger city, more money, maybe even more tourists now, you know, so it's normal. Another big story too, besides Newfoundland kind of falling off when it comes to the food scene, is Vancouver. I mean, Vancouver really for a long time in the early 2000s was the culinary hotspot of Canada where everything was happening. And I really think Toronto now has taken over from Vancouver. Vancouver, a lot of restaurants come and go. It's obviously hugely expensive to open a restaurant in Toronto or Vancouver.
Right.
And an advantage that Montrealer still has is
Good
chefs
point.
can
Yeah.
start their own restaurant, whereas in a lot of other cities you're seeing big restaurant groups. And, you know, the most highly rated restaurant in Toronto is a sushi restaurant, you know, with outside money coming in. So, I mean, the Little Chef-owned restaurant is one a lot of people always want to back because, you know, it's somebody really putting their life savings and cooking in their own way instead of having a, you know, David Chang come in and giving him a multi-million-dollar spot and all this. So those restaurants will always be in favor with the food crowd because you want to see that the chef is in the back making his food and his wife is the sommelier and all that.
That's interesting too. When you think about, if you go back to, you know, these name chefs coming in, you think about Joël Robuchon at the casino, and what a mess that turned out to be.
Thank God.
So obviously Montreal is not, you know, welcoming to people like that. We'd rather see local chefs here, right, opening their own restaurants.
Daniel Boulud did very well. He has done very well at Maison Boulud. And the Ritz really did need. I have no problem with any kind of foreign chef coming in, as long as it's not public funds. Joël Robuchon, let's not forget, was Lotto Quebec money, and also today it's closed. Multi-million dollars later, that place is no longer.
Why is it no longer?
Apparently, the pandemic just killed it.
And there was also big backlash about giving money to.
But it was
as
already.
you
But that
recall.
It was
done.
never
already
hugely
done.
successful, and I think Quebecers really did buy into the fact
But there
that
was real backlash. You
Yeah.
remember you were.
Oh, I headed that backlash,
know.
and I would do it again because I think we don't have to pay people to come
Outsiders,
into our
yeah.
city. It makes us look like, you know, bumpkins who need to hire. You know, in the past we used to hire French chefs because we didn't have the talent or the knowledge here, and now we have the talent and knowledge here. So what are they going to bring in a chef from France to run the new Eaton's restaurant on the 9th floor? Well, how would that make our chefs feel, or how would it make us look as a culinary city? We have to stand behind our people.
Especially giving government money.
Well, that just goes. I mean, that was just dumb.
Yeah.
You know, let's be face back. But yeah. So anyway, it's. I think we're always open for chefs to come in from elsewhere here, but you know, if we look back at those Gordon Ramsay days, Gordon Ramsay came here and tried to boss everybody around and his team wanted to tell everybody how to do stuff here, and eventually the team realized that they didn't need to be bossed around by people from England. And we have enough competence here to not bring in people from outside. And Toronto also brought in a lot of chefs from outside, and now, there are still some, but you're seeing less of that.
Right.
So if you had to pick, from the list of the 28 or so Montreal restaurants,
Give us Lesley's top 10.
Some of them. Yeah, what are your
What
particular
would be
favorites?
your top 10?
Gosh, I just don't go out to eat anymore. So I'm not a good person.
But-
There's
but
so many
you-
people go out to eat
Okay,
all
so
the time.
there's one called L'Enfer. I forgot what it was called.
Cabaret de l'Enfer,
Yeah.
amazing. The
Okay.
chef Massimo, one of the most charismatic, great guys ever. Tasting menu format, very foodie. It's on Saint Denis Street. Very cool restaurant, Cabaret de l'Enfer. I wouldn't have taken my mother there. My mother's no longer alive, but I wouldn't have taken her there. But I would take my hip friends there, or my
Okay.
foodie friends there for sure. There's an amazing, I love a restaurant called Mastar. Simon Matisse is a great chef. He's a little lower down the list, but he's hugely talented. That's a real chef-owned restaurant. Like I said, Bar Saint Denis, really interesting food. Mochione. I like there are so many restaurants that I love that just weren't on the list, but
Name some.
well, I like a restaurant called Antoinetta, which is an Italian restaurant that run by just these nice guys, and it's casual, but the food is fantastic.
Where is it?
That is on Papineau and Saint-Zotique, and but I still like going to L'Express. I like going to Le Méac. I actually go out not always to have that chef experience. I actually sometimes go out to have a steak and French fries. I actually go out to eat.
Which is
sometimes.
interesting.
I
It's
know
funny
that
you
sounds
say
crazy,
that.
but
It's funny because I would have thought back in the day, a steakhouse would have been on that list somewhere
Yes,
at the
it
top
would
of that
have, yeah,
list.
yeah.
That's off
Funny,
the
I saw it
charts.
on the Toronto list, Barbarian. That's been around forever and ever, isn't it?
oh, is it the Toronto Steakhouse?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well,
So-
they're
And
not.
that's one of those old school.
Yeah, steakhouses are like for businessmen. That's
Yeah.
the way it's seen. But
Nice
unless it's an
foodie places.
innovative.
But it's the same
steakhouse.
concept. They say anybody can make a steak kind of thing. And although Monarch has got a great steak.
They've got a great steak at Monarch. Yeah. But back in the day, Montreal was famous for its fish restaurants, right? So like people
Right.
go to Desjardins and Chez Posé and the Atlantic Pavilion.
Right.
Fish restaurants no longer exist because now chefs are making fish in their restaurants. So before you'd see like one fish dish or whatever, but like there was La Marée, which was really like
Yeah.
90% fish, and
Right.
they just put a token steak there. So styles of restaurants have changed radically. We're not even seeing any French restaurants anymore.
It's true,
We're
actually.
like-
And Greek restaurants have taken over the fish market basically when it comes down to it.
Absolutely.
You have a lot of hybrids, sort of like Mediterranean / Asian and Chinese / Thai, and
Yeah.
that's something we didn't have that long ago either. I don't know if they. I don't know
Well,
if
fusion
they made
was
the
kind
list.
of fusion was kind of 18, 20 years ago, but I went to a restaurant called Jatoba the other night, and
Right.
they said it was Chinese and Japanese fusion, and I thought, wow, I'm not too convinced that Chinese and Japanese
Yeah.
chefs really think that those two cuisines can be fused, but it comes under this Asian umbrella, like Asian.
I know, frankly, I miss Yangtze egg rolls. I'm a simple guy. so-
Ruby Foo's egg rolls.
Ruby Foo's not on the
ribs, yeah,
list,
the
I know.
but it
spare
would
ribs.
have been in the. Really, Ruby Foods, when you look back, was probably the most legendary restaurant. Chez Bardet and Ruby Foods were the legendary
And
restaurants
their
of
spare
Montreal.
ribs, which we can only
And the
get.
spare ribs, yeah.
And you know
I'm
where you
way
can get
too
them.
young to have.
I still lament the days we
Latitude,
lost House of
19.
Juan, which is actually just up the road from
Yeah.
here, which is where we used to eat as kids. But
Hong Kong,
we have to wrap up. So if you were going to go to a restaurant tonight, not
Right.
based on the list, but just you want to go out, you want to have a nice night, where would it be?
Well, I'd like to go to Mon Lapin because
You're not getting in.
I know I won't get in. And tonight is the opening of the Eaton's Ninth Floor, but that wouldn't be. I think I would really want to go to somewhere like. We have such an embarrassment of choices in Montreal,
Yeah.
places to
Pick
go.
one, Lesley.
One restaurant I could go to tonight. I might be interested to go and see what they're doing at Tokay because I haven't been there for a long time. And, I like to see some of the restaurants that were once famous, see how they're doing.
Okay, I'm going to make it easier for you
Sorry,
to
I'm
go for
making it-
Italian tonight. Where would you go?
I go to Impasto because I think Impasto is a great restaurant with great chefs. I would go to Graziella. I'd have to save up a little bit. She makes an amazing ossobuco. It's kind of what you're up for at the last minute and who's going to pay the bill. That's a big issue with me is who's going to pick up the bill.
And if Uber Eats delivers
And if
it,
you had to
yeah.
go for a burger,
A Chez Toussaint is a great place for a burger. You know what makes a
Yes,
great
yes,
burger is Maison Beaulieu at lunch.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that is a great
And they don't serve it
burger.
later in the day. It's only at lunch.
It's only at
Yeah.
lunch, yeah. And I actually went to the Ritz for tea yesterday. I met some people there, and that was a very delightful, sophisticated,
Okay.
not cheap moment.
With
but
cucumber
lovely.
sandwiches?
Yeah, I did have cucumber sandwich, and we
Did
we
they
don't
take
have to
the crust
celebrate.
off?
They did take the crust off. I was thinking about they
Your
did.
mother would have loved
There,
that.
but yeah, but I think we do have to realize that we are lucky here in Montreal that we have. I mean, we're always saying who has the best scene, and these lists bring that up. And the Michelin Guide is in Vancouver and Toronto, and there are big rumors that it's now going to come to Montreal and Quebec City. And what bothers me about something like that,
You have to pay for that, though, basically.
yeah, they're willing. They're apparently they're discussing paying for it. But we don't also want to end up in a situation where Canada's top-rated restaurant is a sushi place in Toronto. I mean, one thing I think we really do well in Quebec is that we really were the first province to think local and to have local chefs, and that we can go out and eat kind of Quebecois modern cuisine. And yes, we can get Greek food or we can get Italian food, but Canada has to have an identity. And I think what's nice about this list is you do see a strong Canadian identity. I don't think there was a restaurant in Saskatchewan. I mean, but that across the country,
Yeah.
we're eating well at a time. Halifax. Somebody said you don't eat well in Halifax. Well, there's a restaurant on that list, and that this country is developing, and this list.
It's
is
more
proof of
than
that.
poutine, damn it.
There's more than poutine, damn it. Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. We're not a poutine nation.
And
No,
we'll
we're not.
close on that note. All right, Leslie, thank you.
Thank you,
Appreciate
guys.
it.
Thank
That's
you
it
for
for
having
us
me
on
on
this
the
edition of the
corner
Corner
booth.
Booth.
And now
We'll
you
see
get the
again,
Danish.
I get the Danish.
You get
Exactly.
the Danish.
I'm sorry, I missed all this. We'll see you again soon. Thanks.